Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome again to a session that I'm really excited about. And I'm so happy to welcome Flavio from FORRT with us today. I know today's session is going to be so exciting and amazing. So without further ado, Flavio, the floor is yours, please.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Flavio Azevedo. I'm a Brazilian researcher working currently in the Netherlands. I am an assistant professor at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. I um, I work on the field of interdisciplinary social sciences, so interdisciplinarity is very core to my research. But normally I call myself as a political psychologist. So I study the political psychology of people's attitudes, political behavior, and all of that. But that has nothing to do with FORRT. And at FORRT, which is an organization that we funded about 5 years ago, it stands for the Framework of Open and Reproducible Research Training. That's the whole banner here. Um, and it's an organization that has 1,200 people across the world. And essentially, we try to have a community to leverage our knowledge and our resources in the global north um, to pull people from the global south or low and middle income countries up, essentially trying to help people. So we conduct a lot of what these call big team science projects, or we get together to do very very ambitious projects in open science. So it is in the area of open science. Um, and, we help folks to get acquainted with the methods of research and collaboration in the global north. We develop I'm speaking as if I'm representative of the global north. That's not the point, but there's a lot of resources here that we can, put to use to essentially find ways to have more generalizable science, to have perspectives from the African continent, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility into how we do open science, right? Because the conversation on open science is often about methodological reform, right? Which we absolutely need, but we can also talk about the need for accessibility, diversity, inclusion, and equity. All right, so this is more or less why FORRT exists. And what I'm going to do is show you a little bit of the website. I was talking to Manuel and Lemis just now, and they said, well, that might be helpful. So I will just, I shared with you on the chat the website link, but I'll share my screen with you in just a second. And also there is an invite to our Slack. Please join our Slack. There's lots of opportunities. A lot of organizations put in their either, conferences, job advertisements, research assistant positions, not to mention a bunch of other opportunities. So do check it out. And if you don't have it, just write it and I will, I'll copy paste again. All right, so after I show the website and I tell you more or less the resources that are available at FORRT, I will talk about replications, what they are, why they are important, what is the credibility revolution, or some people heard of the replication crisis, and that will be it. And now the most important thing for me is that you guys let me know if what I'm doing is useful to you. So at any moment, if you raise your hand, I'll try to stop and answer a question. It is super important that we do this together collectively. And I may have said that, but in Brazil, that's how we do things. In the global north is more like a lecture kind of thing. Hey, I have the knowledge. Students listen. That's not super how education should go. There is a big educator in Brazil called Freire, and among the marvelous things he says is that education is a co-construction with your students. We need to have a back and forth for us to be really into learning. Learning can only happen if we do it together in some sort of way. All right, so now I'll talk about FORRT just a little bit, what it is, and I'll share my screen with you with the website, and you can ask questions at any moment. All right, let me do this. Right. So this is FORRT's website. This is the main page. There's nothing too useful here, but the major idea of FORRT is that we provide, well, our mission is to integrate open and reproducible science into higher education. And the way that we do this is by providing a lot of educational materials. Think of an organization that provides resources for you to learn open science, about open science, what it is, what it stands for, definitions. Think about, we're an organization that provides teaching resources. So if you are a teacher, right, we're in the trainers here, there you can find lesson plans, you can find a glossary for you to teach and learn about open science. You can find a review of the impact of open science into your students. You have summaries of open scholarship. So I will go through a little bit of those initiatives and 2 minutes, and then we can start. So first, we have an initiative called Adopting Principal Education, which is essentially a list of things that you can do just to implement open science into your pipeline, whether it's your research or teaching pipeline, but it's like things that you can, just websites, podcasts, small bits of open science that you can introduce into your teaching, just that you have a little bit of open science so that your students hear about open science. This is possibly one of the smallest initiatives that we have. Then we have the FORRT clusters. The idea of the clusters is that we got together with our community and we defined what open science is, what we think open science is, for us at least. And we produced this 7 clusters of what it means, what are the subclusters, the little categories within each cluster. And for each one of them, there is a literature associated. So this is a little bit like creating curriculum. So here, for example, it's the history of reproducibility and credibility revolution. QRPs, if you don't know, it's questionable research practices. So there's the literature here on questionable research practices. And for each clusters, there is it's the literature that has been curated by our community. For example, questionable measurement practices on cluster 2. But you go all the end, there's lots of literature in each cluster, but one cluster that I'm particularly proud is the cluster 7 that talks about academic life, ethics, and culture, where we talk about inclusion, feminist thought, big team science, adversarial collaborations, and etc. So that's the clusters. Then we have the largest database of resources in the world, at least as far as we are aware, not in the least because we partner up with the Center for Open Science, who donated their resources to us. And now I think we have 1,300 resources. So if you come here and you're like, replication. So as long as it's the full word, it will show you this many resources on replications. It can be any word, quantitative, qualitative. It can be education. It can be whatever. But you type in the full word and then it will find you the results. Okay. And then once you click, so for example, here, you click on the resource, there is an abstract. So it's really curated resources And if you have any questions or if there is a mistake, you can always edit this page via GitHub. All right. Moving on, we have the Educator's Corner, where it's essentially a blog where a lot of interesting people talk about resources, courses, and all that shebang there. We have Equity in Open Science Initiative, so do check that out. We have the glossary of open science. So for example, if you're ever wondering what a given name means, have you ever asked like, what is carking? What is harking? What is QRPs? Like you click here in English and we are creating several other languages. We have it in German and Arabic. But we are translating to 11 different languages. So if you feel like, hey, I speak French, I could help this out. I speak Spanish, I speak Portuguese. Do join our Slack, and most likely, not most likely, you will be included in our publications that will come out of this. So there is a peer review publication, but also, you know, you come here. In this case, I'll show you the German, and then you find it is great to find curated definitions that are not machine learning translated into something that you're trying to learn in your own language, right? So in this case of English here, we have defined over 130 terms with experts from all fields, right? So this is not just our community. We reached out to experts and we defined a lot of terms. For example, what carking is, or open science, or content validity, and so forth. All right. We were going to come back to this in the beginning of my presentation about replication, because we need to know what is replication, what is reproducibility, right? All right. Then we have an entire review on the impact of open science into students' attitudes, outcomes, and engagement. Do they learn better? Are they more engaged? Do they trust science more? So we made an entire review with this many people. As you can see, there is very little people on the global south, Southeast Asia, there's somebody, but in Africa and South America, which I come from, there was nobody. Broke my heart, but we still did it among like almost 100 people, and we managed to pull this very important resource because it's a review and gives a lot of content for people to come to their, you know, their universities and say, this is why I want to teach open science. So if you ever need that kind of arguments, that's the place where you go. Here, we wrote an entire review to give you arguments for you to say, why should you teach open science? All right. Then we have lesson plans that are, you know, if you feel like teaching, for example, on any of these topics, we literally have broken down lesson plans. So in this case here, I'll show you how we what a lesson plan looks like, but essentially it's a very good organization with links and didactics and pedagogies of how you can teach about open science, right? So coming back here, there's 10 here, and we are adding 23 more, 23 more very soon. Then we have initiatives towards social justice, which is essentially if you want to be mentored by FORRT people, etc., do check it out later. We have an entire team on neurodiversity. We also have pedagogies, which is essentially we're trying to open people's teaching. So if you're looking like how can I improve my teaching, or how is it that amazing teachers are teaching their topics, you can come here. You will see there's many people doing open teaching or open pedagogy. Then we have the summaries of open and reproducible research training, which is essentially, we thought that in the Global South, I myself didn't have access to a lot of papers when I was there, and I couldn't read them. So we thought of making summaries so that people had access, you know, to these, at least to the topics of these papers. Did somebody say something?
I think it was just by mistake.
Oh, all right. So I'll just continue. Let me know, but please stop me at any time, just like if you have questions and etc. All right. So here there is over 100 summaries of what is closed research papers. And you can also, if you're learning a topic, so for example, pre-registration, you search for one on pre-registration and they have links. For example, this is the links for register report, and you can loop in. So you can essentially start with one summary, then go to another, go to another, go to another, and you come back to the origin. So you can learn about a topic pretty fast. And we also make a difference between open and reproducible science, so open science, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we really think is not only part of open science, but more than that is crucial to all the topics that we are studying here, right? And then we have syllabus. So if you are an educator, you can readily use the syllabus of FORRT about open science. So we provide an editable, because you can come here and just say download and edit offline, etc., or ask questions. And we give you an entire summary, an entire syllabus that can get you started on the teaching of open science, right? And here is a collection of all the teaching materials that we have heard of, right? That we were able to collect, to curate, that can also help you in that format. And just finally, two things. First, we have a publications page. So we published a lot of articles. Our community have been very lucky on publishing, on trying to push forward the limit of what open science is, especially towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. So do check out our papers. And here we have the Replication Hub. The Replication Hub is everything meta science. This is more or less the topic that we're going to talk about today. So it's essentially a portal where, for example, you can come to the FORRT Explorer, which I'll show you in a second, where you can study the meta science of replications. Like if you want data, this is the largest database of replications in the world. Not only the curated resources, we also have the largest replications as well. And the important part of this is that it's a Shiny app. It's gonna load in a minute. The important part of this is that it allows you to study the meta science parts of replications that are existing. It allows you to contribute to the list of replications that we have, and you can become an author. So this is like an ongoing project. And here it's calculating some graphs based on our current database. But you can see it's very well documented, and you can do lots of things like what are the correlates of replicability. And you can download this data and analyze it yourself. Okay, so everything is super open. All right, I'm coming back to FORRT. And the second thing about the replication is the FORRT annotator. It's another app, so it might take a little bit to load. But essentially, it's the idea that, let's say you're writing an article or you're teaching and you have a syllabus, and you can upload these into this Shiny app. And based on the DOI, it will tell you, actually, this paper that you're citing has not been replicated. So we match your reference list or your syllabus list, and the reads that are there, the literature that is there based on the DOI, and we tell you what has been replicated, what has not been replicated, and it's good. So you don't need to cite any more non-replicable research, right? Or teach non-replicable research, or at least be aware, right? Like, so you had to manually Google, so we are creating a system that you can use. All right, great. So this is FORRT. This is our initiative. Do join our Slack. It's on the chat on the Zoom, but also there's a page called Get Involved that you can also learn the projects that we are working on. All right, I'll stop here and ask a little, see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll continue to the slides.
I think I would just like to say that this is mind-blowing. This is a treasure, and I feel like giving it just like 5 or 10 minutes is not enough. So I think we would really like to have a whole session around FORRT. Definitely, yeah.
Thank you very much, Lemis.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Flavio. Yeah, and the comments have been like flowing all over the place. Yeah, it's amazing. I don't know if anyone would like to comment.
Yeah, Lamesh, I think the reasons are especially also going to be useful for our trainees here. Yeah, since they will be operating as local network leads and will be engaging their community. So I think knowing that there is a platform they can go to get all these resources about open science, various aspects of open science is really, really helpful. I'm sure a lot of them were wondering where they are going to get all these resources to come up with their training materials and etc. So thank you so much, Flavio, and what FORRT is doing. Yeah, it's just wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I really appreciate it. And please be aware that if you join our Slack, you're able to contribute to this to these resources and participate or at least lurk. It's super okay to join the Slack and just see what is around, right? Because that's the beauty of it, right? We're there, we're trying to help, and it's a great community, right? Okay. I'll start with the lecture, and if nobody has any questions about FORRT, please let me know now. Otherwise, I'll start with the lectures. Okay.
I think you can go ahead. Everyone is just amazed. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So I think you can see my slides now.
Yes, perfect.
Lamesh, I saw Paul raise the hand. I don't know if he wants to talk or maybe that was a mistake.
Okay, go ahead, Paul. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to appreciate presenter this morning for this for the eye-opening session on FORRT. Meanwhile, I think I've created an account with FORRT, and I am on the Slack platform, but it is unfortunate I've not been really following them. But with what I've heard this morning, I have to follow the platform now. Starting from today, I'll be following them. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So I'll start with the slides. Let me just switch my screen. All right. So today, let me know if you don't see the slides, but I think you do. Today, we're going to talk about the replication crisis and how and if it led to positive changes. So first, we're going to see what replication is. We're going to have a few definitions, etc. But I'm going to tell you that we learn a lot from it. And usually when we talk about replications, we are very negative. The science is broken and a lot of negative things. But I think that while science has its problems, and while we absolutely should improve the way we do science, it also shows that we very relatively fast, we were able to improve the way we do our science. Okay, all right. So a little bit of the background. First, in the glossary that I shared with FORRT, there is what is replication, right? So replication is the idea that a different researcher or even the same researcher can try to see a paper and replicate its results, to reproduce the results of the paper in different contexts, sometimes Sometimes they are testing, alternative hypotheses, but it's the idea that within the scope of the paper, you test the same claims that that paper is making, right? Those authors are making, or that theory is making. So essentially, you try to replicate, redo, or do again, with different data, and see if you find the same results, right? Because it is important for us to be able to replicate results, in the sense that, how else could we build cumulative science? So we need to know that if I repeat something like an experiment or a finding, it repeats. We can obviously study, to what conditions it doesn't replicate, right? So if it is about, oh, when I show you a green screen, you become happier, but you study, for example, under severe conditions. So somebody is going hungry, or somebody just lost a parent. Does that still work? Does the showing the green screen still work, right? So that's a simple example of it. That's not a finding. It's not a real finding. It's just a simple way to explain. And of course, there is the word reproducibility. And at least in the way that we define reproducibility, that has to do with essentially using the same materials of the previous research. So for example, we use the same data, the same code, everything. So it's less about making something new and just making sure that the conclusions that the original authors arrived with their materials is reproducible, right? So that's the idea. So reproducibility is, in at least in today's lecture, or in our FORRT definition, reproducibility is about, computational reproducibility, if you will, right? So you use the same code, the same data, and etc. You're just trying to observe whether the claims of the original authors really are robust, and can be repeatable. Now, replication is different data, different sample, and testing some boundary conditions, okay? All right, that's what replication is. And if there's no questions, I'll go forward. So a little bit, background. Up to the 2010s, so not long ago, 15 years ago, the focus of all science, more or less, was about novelty and discovery. We wanted new things because we took for granted the idea that, you might find something, a given result, but that might be random error, or that the statistics that we were using are not the best, or it's not the most robust, and etc. So the focus on novelty and discovery really is an important part of scientific endeavor, and it allows the field to go forward, right? It questions the concepts that we have and how we've been doing things differently. It introduced new things, and novelty has been the flagship of science. However, while these are great objectives, it's equally important to produce robust findings, right? And robust means that a finding holds even if changing certain parameters or conditions, and etc. So in other words, we want to produce findings in science that we can trust, and which are telling, as telling as possible about to how many people in the world these findings are replicable, right? Because at least in social, cognitive, and behavioral sciences, right? So we want to refer to that generalizability of findings. So for a long time, statisticians have outlined how to conduct this, this replication reports and findings. But until the 2010s, that wasn't super much looked after. It wasn't traditional that we would look at these replications. So to some degree, there was a lack of established standards that at least was, how to analyze data in a certain way. And with that pressure of publishing new findings, you can imagine that it's a recipe for not super replicable research, right? So for example, which is very unfortunate, the focus on novelty and the lack of standards to analyze data, methodological reform, led to many research practices that introduced what is called false positives, right? So false positives are claims that a given effect exists when they don't, right? Because you're looking for novelty. Each time you analyze data, you do it in a creative way, and then that generates false positives. And they can be induced in the data set or the way that you analyze your data. So essentially, whenever you have a very well, let's say the traditional alpha level, the alpha, the 0.05 or of your p-value, but alpha level is the error rate, 1 in 20. So in other sciences, the alpha level is much, much smaller. So you need a lot more confidence in your findings, right? That's one of the things that are important. Okay, so an example of, at least in psychology, but I'm from political science, and I'm sure you have other sciences. We can talk about this in many different ways, but there is the classic example of Ben, 2011, about precognition. So precognition was the idea that it was a published paper, if I'm not mistaken, on JPSP, which is the flagship journal of psychology, that people could predict an event that has not been, a coin flip, and that was called precognition. There was evidence about people being able to tell more often than chance whether it would be tails or heads, something to that effect. Okay, and of course, this is impossible because we know the truth. The world is, we know reality. And I think that paper has led to this, at least is a big mark on, hey, we have a replication crisis here. So studies like Ben caused a lot of controversy, as you can imagine. And it's not clear anymore whether, people could trust the science that we were producing, at least in psychology. We're talking about psychology in this case, but I can tell you of other papers in marketing, in social decision-making, in economics, in etc., political science. So in any case, and it's not clear how to verify for scientists then how to change this. How do we make our science more replicable, right? So replication studies, were not super accepted by journals. They were not novel, right? So, all right, and then, as I mentioned, replications, they refer to testing previously reported effect in a different sample, right? This can be done conceptually or loosely by capturing an effect in a different way than it was before, right? Like think about using different operationalizations, different data processing, different statistical techniques, etc. But another way is, to do replications as close as possible, literally following the protocols or the guidance of the original paper. So this is called a direct replication, right? Yeah. And as the time went by, what we found is we got together, scientists, I'm not part of it, but scientists got together and they tried to replicate 100 studies at the same time. Because what they really wanted is to see, hey, what is the rate of replications that we have? Are we really in a crisis, right? And so this, by the way, 100 studies, you can imagine the size of this. So this is what we call big team science, right? The idea that a lot of people in many different places of the world pool resources together so that we can do science that individually we wouldn't be able to do ourselves, right? Like that. I hope that makes sense. All right, then and then we did this and we find that the replicability was about 40%, right? So we expected somewhere between 80, 90, depending on, but we found a low rate. All right, so here is just a review of what we're talking about, replication versus reproduction, and in this case here, Parsons et al., which is the reference of these definitions, are on the website, on the FORRT glossary website. And replication, repeating the experiment or study to obtain new independent data. Reproduction, which is similar to computational reproducibility, is to recreate the same results using the materials from the data from the original study. It's like checking, right? So reproduction is or reproducibility is like just checking whether the data they produce is the data that they said it is, right? Now that we started talking about replication crisis in the context of psychology, sure, but perhaps there's many other fields that show problems, right? The same practices was throughout academia, and since the large-scale replication of the open science, it was called Open Science Collaboration 2015, many more other replications have been conducted, and the results are the following. So we look at psychology, we find that replications are 64% successful, with effect sizes being 32% smaller than the original. So that's a lot. So not only replications are not very common, but when we do replicate, the original effect sizes. So if you don't know what effect size is the magnitude or the pungency, the strength of an effect, right? How much does your independent variable affect the dependent variable? That's what effect size is. And of course, there is a metric for this we call standardized, effect sizes, but it is harder than it appears. But essentially what we're saying is that if we find the number to be 1, in Cohen's d, in the standardized metric, we find that in the replication it's 0.032, so a significant decrease. And then we saw in cancer biology, we saw in economics, that the same kind of pattern, and etc. So more broadly, you can see here a list of this, of several of these studies that put in, there's certain studies that have different percentages, as you can see here, that are very, very low, right? By the way, if I haven't said this before, these slides are openly available at our website, at our replication hub, and they come also with the notes, the didactics and pedagogy. So if you're liking this, lecture, you can give it yourself. That's the idea of FORRT, opening up ways for you to not only learn about open science, but also be able to teach it, right? All right, cool. So the problem for us is that, replication studies produce different results dependent on the study and field. And overall, replication rates have been far lower than expected, which led to, this labels of, hey, it's a replication crisis, right? So the share of studies of the total volume of the studies that we are replicating, that is, the number of replications are very small, right? So it's maybe not generalizable, but the ones we have conducted shows lower replication levels than we wanted. So that's why we think, there is a replication crisis. Why, there's famous papers, here you have the Open Science Collaboration 2015. We have the famous Simonson's paper, which is false positive psychology. And we have why most published research are findings. Those are classic papers in this area. All right. So keeping, it seems logical to see the replication crisis as a learning opportunity, as a chance to improve upon how we do science, right? So we can consider all the suggestions on how to improve scientific practice and improve the way we go about doing science collectively, more inclusively, think about other things that we have neglected, like sample generalizability, and etc. For example, those are just suggestions. Like other people would say more statistics, more rigorous methodology. All of those are super valid suggestions. So within this framework of improvement, right, Simin Vazir, which is the reference at the bottom of the slide, came up with a potentially way to improve or to reframe, instead of saying replicability crisis, it's she said, hey, it's credibility revolution. Let's talk about a revolution towards credibility. So this terms, it suggests, various concepts, which is like great emphasis on transparency and openness, a move towards pre-registration of research, more direct replication studies, higher standard of quality and quantity of evidence needed to make strong scientific claims. So in other words, change is already happening, and so far, or at least before the work that we did this work that I'm presenting to you, there was no resource structuring all these developments into one article, just one article that you can read, a bit on the long side, I will say, but that summarizes what are the structural, procedural, and community level changes that we have developed since the reproducibility crisis to improve the science that we make. All right, so I'll stop here. This is a natural stopping point, and I'll just ask you guys if you so far understood the claim, the story, the background, the context, and then from now on, I will talk about the ways we improved our science. I'll start with, and I'll start with that. So I'll just stop sharing this for a moment and see if there is any questions.
Actually, what I loved is I feel like the social sciences have sort of been neglected in the field of open science a lot. So what I loved is that like many of the examples that you gave now are related more to social sciences. I really loved that.
Thank you, Lois. All right. If there are no questions, I'll continue. That's super okay. But I just want to give the opportunity for people to say a few things. And I see that Ahmed is also popping up a few interesting links. Thank you, Ahmed. Hey, Musa, please
Okay, thank you very much for nice presentation. It's a really very interesting topic. I think in my view, taking replicability is easier than checking reproducibility. So my question is checking reproducibility feasible? Is it practical? Like it needs a lot of maybe funding or a lot of support. So who is responsible for supporting such kind of study? Maybe, again, in my opinion, maybe funders, are they interested to fund, to repeat the same study to check reproducibility? And that's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Musa. Thank you very much for this question. So you're completely right that funders have not been super keen on funding the same research, right? So in this case, replications with new data, right? And also, as far as I'm aware, there is not too many opportunities for you to be paid to check other people's data in code, you know, what we would call reproducibility. So it has been very difficult to find fundings for both. Nowadays, there are some initiatives that provide funding. So, for example, today, the famous PNAS journal, so that's the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States, published a replication. And it might not be the first time, but to my knowledge, it is, because PNAS was historically super against this, but it's a really important journal. And today it published a paper on the replication of priming the idea of God and AI, something to that effect. It's not my field, but I saw on my timeline today. And you have organizations like Reproducibility for Everyone, that is very nice, and they conduct events that you can, you know, take somebody's data and try to reproduce and encode and try to reproduce it. So there is some initiatives, and they tend to be just like FORRT. They tend to be volunteer-based. They tend to be grassroots, in the sense that it's the scientific community that is trying to do the work so that we have a better science ourselves. So, but you know, you have organizations like the Invest in Open Science, it's called IOI, and a few other organizations that are starting to try to bring replications to the fore, mostly on the global north, is my understanding. But there's some projects that are trying to do that. The COS, so the Center for Open Science, had a project that was funded by the Defense Department. It's called the initiative is called SCORE. I'll put it on the doobly chat here. SCORE, COS. And if you Google that, you're going to find their page. And so that was the largest replication that the world has ever seen, to my knowledge. All right. Thank you for your question. I hope I have answered, Musa. But if you
yes, thank you very much. Yeah, you have answered.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, and I'll continue to tell you a little bit about the changes that we observe towards, positive changes that we observe that improved the way that we believe that improved the way that we do our science.
Flavio, sorry, just before you continue, Michael has a question in the chat. He asked if you could comment on reproducibility in policy research.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a very interesting question. I am not super aware of that, but I will give you, let me give you a link. So I will share 2 links with you. Okay, so you can use this link here. So it's called Reversals and Replications. It is a website where it has several areas. So it's the same as the FRED Explorer, which I will also send you the link. But it's a place where you can search for replications on your area, and essentially you can check for yourself, so to speak. But I myself, I am not aware of studies on policy or related fields. That's not, but I would venture that that's super interesting in general. And if you do find it something on our database, let us know. If not, I would say help us, and because you can add studies that have been replicated to our database. So help us is what I would say if you don't find it. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think it's perfect. Thank you.
All right, folks. Right. So let's start talking about, how did we think of these modes of change? How did we improve our science? So one way of structuring positive developments as a result of the reproducibility crisis or the credibility revolution is to classify them in structural, community, and procedural change, right? There are some general trends which can be noticed when reviewing the literature. So first, there is an increase of working in teams. So if you recall, big team science was not a thing 10 years ago. People did mostly their research on their own labs, and now we are more and more conducting studies globally. So that's a community level change. So that's community change. We're working more in teams. Another thing that we notice is that methods and statistical procedures that were not being used are now, especially advanced methods, are being more used. So that's the procedure level. There's many statistical techniques advances, methods advances. So that's what we conceived as procedural change, because a lot of people created tools, a lot of people created statistical techniques and etc. that we can now use towards robustness. And there's also a sort of a normalization of open science, right? So there is more incentives for people to open their data, to open their code, to have their paper open as well. So it's that normalization that we talk about structural level changes, right? And we're going to discuss these soon. Right. So the first change that we saw is curriculum changes. So we saw that a lot of the ways that we are teaching our science, the way that methods and statistics are taught, people implemented open science practices in it, right? So for example, and if you don't know what open science is, let me just say, maybe I didn't explain that. Oh my God. But open science is just that idea of that knowledge of all kinds, where appropriate, as people say, open as possible, closed as necessary. Knowledge should be openly accessible, transparent. It should be rigorous. It should be replicable, reproducible, accumulative, that is to say cumulative, that we are able to derive knowledge and wisdom from it, and inclusive. So that's what open science is. It consists of principles and behaviors that promote transparency, research integrity, credible, reproducible science. So open science has several, components, but open data, open methodology, open source, open access, open peer review, and open education. So those are 6 but you can say that big team science is also part of open science, for example, right? It's not closed. It doesn't mean it's just 6. It's an evolving conversation, right? So in the following presentation, we're going to take a closer look at the curriculum changes. So we're creating norms with curriculum changes, right? Like learning about open scholarship practices. We tell students how to approach science, both as a researcher, but also as a consumer of science. Remember that, higher education is all about training not people to be academics, but people to have the tools so that they can still deal with science by reading newspapers, by, getting acquainted with certain things on social media, all of that. So we are training good consumers of science, right? So we are implementing open science norms into the way that we teach in higher education. So this is one advancement. Another advancement, it's large collections of open source teaching and learning materials, creating knowledge bases, resources, guidelines, community, and all of that. That also help increase a lot. So, think about, meta science, research transparency, that is done at FORRT, for example. But think about the carpentries, where you can learn how to Git, or the Turing way, where you can learn how to GitHub, or reproducible research pipelines. You have the reproducibility T that have a lot of resources, and its journal club allows people to create community, right? So these efforts are very grassroots, right? It's not funded, like Musa mentioned, but there's more and more funds for these sort of things. All right. Another advancement is that higher education professors, teachers, instructors have been integrating open science into the curriculum, either as part of the thesis level, right? So think about large-scale collaborations between students. I don't know if you've heard of CRAPE, for example, but you can conduct, as a teacher, I supervise about, I want to say 10 bachelor students and about 5 master students a year. So I try to make them about replications, right? So introducing to the students ideas about, how important it is to replicate results, but also publish that replication data online so that it can be taken up, these collections of replications as well, right? So this procedure normally goes like, you select a study that has been most cited in the last 3 years, then you have advisors rate the feasibility of replications and to decide whether or not to run that study. Should we do it ourselves, just our few students here, or should we collaborate with other people internationally? And then the studies are conducted by the student, and after the study's completion, all the materials, data, they are submitted for meta-analysis, and the students themselves are invited to be co-authors. Isn't that nice? So you're introducing the students to the replication concepts and all of that. So you're educating, but you're also advancing the field. And I want to share with you the initiative, CRAPE. So I'm just Googling Jordan Wagi and CRAPE, just so that I can find the project. I found it now. Okay, I'll share with you on the chat. So let me see if I can find the chat. Yeah, all right. So this is CRAPE, the Collaborative Replications Education Project. It's an amazing project, amazing people. Yeah, just this is one of the ways that we can move forward. Right. Then there is single replication studies, right? There's a lot more folks publishing replication studies themselves. You know, I myself, I founded this thing that I want to replicate it that was important to me. And I said, I'm going to replicate this. I went there and replicated. There was not much support, but I didn't find a replication, by the way. But the idea is that there's the individual side of things on top of the collective side of things. Like think about that OSC paper that is on the chat, but also the COS score initiative where a lot of people get together and try to replicate things. Then you have, you know, still at the structural level, you have, you know, journals, funders, and researchers that are trying to change the incentives, right? They are trying to, you know, find ways for us to be even more open. So traditional incentives for academics to advance their career, so opening their articles, winning their grants, signaling the quality of their published research, all of this is considered, you know, prestigious. So if you open your research, you're able to, you know, be seen as more, as your research is more has more quality. For example, badges can be used to signal this sort of things. Certain journals are considered to be open journals, so they have rules that you can only publish there if you have open data, open code, and you know, you have a reproducible pipeline. All of these things. And another one is you can use the peer community in platform, the PCI. I don't know if you know that. That's a great community, peer community in platform. Do check that out. So researchers, they review independently submitted register reports. So you propose one and that gets review. And when they recommend the register report for publication, so that's independent reviewers, right? Instead of going to a journal, they can be published in some journals directly because they have an agreement with this community, the peer community in, and then the journal is a choice of the authors rather than the other way around. How about that? So that is changing the structure of incentives, right? Another thing has to do with funding. Funding opportunities from both national and grassroots organizations are more frequent. So think about, I mentioned a few things, but you know, the Dutch Research Council, it's called NVO in the Netherlands, has had a few calls. There's a meta-scientific program called MetaRep in Germany. That is funded by the Research Association of Germany. We have, you know, there's the SCORE program. There's the Institute of Replications. So the Institute of Replications is super interesting because they conduct events, and that's for reproduction. They call it replication. That's why we need a glossary. We should all be on the same page, but what they do, the Institute for Replication, is they essentially, you know, reproduce things. So it's the same data, same material, same code as the original. But they have games. It's an amazing initiative led by American researchers. Do check it out. All right. Then, you know, a little bit about, we have the Replication Hub. We have the replication database ourselves at FORRT that tries to, you know, popularize but also democratize access to these replications. We have the reversals, which I already sent the URL where you can Control F, and once you click on the paper, it's just a different way to see the same data, right? And you have, yeah, all these initiatives at FORRT that you can deal with replications. Then also at the structural change level, you know, there's incentives for researchers. So badges are awarded in some journals for when you do open science practices, or when you publish a certain type of paper, right? So, you know, register report. So essentially, you say you write your entire paper in a way that without having access to the data, right? Before collecting data, you write the introduction, the method section, you even write the code with which you're going to analyze the data. And, that ensures, gives a lot of confidence that once you collected the data, you just put in the data set now, and then you can conduct your paper. I see that there is Lamis have a hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring to your attention a question in the chat by Ernest, which is talking around the same thing that you're talking about. He's asking if replication studies are accepted by journals for publication, especially in peer-reviewed papers, and also if these studies could be accepted by academic institution when presented in a form of thesis.
All right. So I want to thank Ernest for the question. And the first one, are they accepted? Yes, they are. More and more journals are accepting replication studies, right? So it is not a given. So for example, I know that in sociology specifically, there is very few journals that accept replication studies. But in psychology, I would say that at least half of them do. In political science, the flagship journals, I would say that 30% do accept, but this number is growing. So there is a site. It's if you go to the top, COS Tops, I will write it on the COS Tops. TOPS is a guideline for journals, but essentially they have a collection of journals that accept replications, I believe. I might be wrong, but I really think there is a place by COS that shows you which journals accept replications. What in agriculture? Agriculture, I am aware that there is lots of replications, yes. They accept it, and they for them they are ahead of time. I would say agriculture has a lot of replications, yeah, and a lot of good statistics as well. May I add? And the second questions by Ernest is, are they accepted institutions in the form of thesis? I would say that as long as this has been agreed with the supervisor, yes, and I see that more and more. So it is less of a yes or no to your questions, although I would like to say yes. It's more a gradation. It's increasing in time.
If I may add something, Flavio, I think for the second question, I feel like this is our role, because everyone here in this call and in this training program are working within academic institution. And I think it's our role to convey to these institutions how important these studies are. And at the same time, I think I'm not sure if they take a lot of resources to do, but could they be like type of studies that could be done in a low resource setting or not? Because yeah, if yes, or maybe like not doing the replications themselves, but like trying to look in the literature. Because I think I'm always looking, like, for example, for my students, when they have to do a research project, especially now we are at war, so there are no labs, that they could work in. So like what studies can they do instead of just doing a literature review, for example, or a computational study? But I would really like to know if such studies could be done, like to help understand more about the replication crisis.
That's a really good point. There has been so in the last 10 years we're trying to figure that out. But then again, Lemis, it's important to contextualize that we're trying to figure that out in the global north, where resources, there is a scarcity of them here, but the scarcity that we do feel here is very different from the scarcity that we have, say, in Brazil or in many African countries, where we're talking about very different qualitative and certainly quantitative differences. So, for example, you mentioned the case of war. It is hard to think of studies that could be replicated there, but it is super important, perhaps, to analyze. For example, that's just because it's my area. You know, whenever there is wars, there is usually groups, there's identity involved. So it is a specific context that is extremely set, but there are certain aspects that some scientists may choose to study, or looking at, you know, what is the effect on the terrain of wars, right? Like there are, yeah, I really don't know. I find, you know, I find a bit not only the unethical part, not only the scarcity part, but also the ethics of scientists studying during war period. It's something I struggle personally myself, how to deal with that, because, you know, we had wars in Syria, in Ukraine, in Palestine, and I see folks, you know, trying to study things in these regions, and I don't know, I haven't given as much thought as I should have to these issues, and but I already see from within, just myself, without much thinking, that I'm not sure I would be comfortable doing research, because to me it's about, you know, safety, you know, the Maslow pyramid of needs. I don't know if that translates, Lemis. Let me know.
Actually, like for me, like being involved in such a situation, and my students, it's an empowering experience, you know, for you to be able to do research and advance your career. For example, my students, the undergraduate students, the war happened while they were conducting their final year research, and they managed to do it within time. And they were so proud of it, you know, and we were so proud of them. So I think actually it's an empowering situation. And that's why I'm always thinking about like what types of research, you know, that we could expose them to, you know, that they could do at the same time to advance their studies and their careers, but at the same time, studies that would be beneficial, you know, not just like a literature review or something like that.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I think the major difference here is that when I was answering the question, I was answering global North people studying, you know, disprivileged regions for their own benefit, rather than locals, locals studying. Like that's you're completely right. That is empowering. Yeah, and in that sense, to answer that part of the question, I would say that there is a few consortia that are doing replications that you might want to get in contact with, because they might be, you know, interested in your results, giving visibility to the things that you're doing. But the Crate project that I shared, they have a recipe that seems to work in many places, including South America and Southeast Asia, that might work for you as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And for the academic institution, for them to
sort of accept these types of studies. Again, I think I said that, but I don't know. I had short-term amnesia. But it's in our job, you know, and what we hope that you as local network leads would be able to convince, you know, these institutions that these studies are important, so they should be accepted as thesis or even for promotion within your career. I think it's very important.
Yeah, I totally agree that it starts with us, doesn't it, Lomis? And
Yeah.
we should all be responsible. So while I am just one of a very big department, my department is very large. I have been trying to convince folks to do more replication studies, and you know, sometimes it starts like this, a small conversation, and then it's your department, and sometimes you go for a talk somewhere else and you're like, hey, have you tried to do this? So yeah, it starts with us for sure. Okay, I will go on just because I'm looking at the time and there's so much content, so I will go a little bit faster. All right, so we talked about what register reports are, which is essentially you do the majority of your research before collecting data, including the statistical technique, the code, and the introduction. And then once you submit that, that gets reviewed, right? And people evaluate the research without looking at the data. Then the data comes, and no matter what the data says, you just, you know, try to publish. You know, you don't try actually. If they review positively, no matter what the data says, your research is published. So there's less false positives. People are less committed to like, oh, I want to show something novel. So it's a really good format, register reports. All right, so the next thing is, you know, these incentives for journals and funders. There's multiple incentives that are provided that, you know, fulfill open science practices. So this can be grouped by several guidelines, which have been widely adopted. So I talked about the top, right, the COS top. It stands for Transparency and Openness Promotion. And those are guidelines by the Center for Open Science, COS, and they comprise of 8 modular standards to reflect the journal's transparency standards. So it's like, how transparent is a given journal, right? So it's citation standards, data transparency, analytical methods. So it's all about transparency on research design, whether it's this, they only accept pre-registration, analysis pre-registration, and replications. So, you know, that's also at that level. There's also the Plan S. The Plan S, it mandates publishing when the research, publishing in an open way, when the research is funded by public grants. And as you may know, that is the big part of how science is made. So essentially, it's the Plan S is mandating that almost all, at least in Europe, research will be published open access. There's some issues to be resolved. You know, article processes. So the APCs, how much you pay to publish open, do increase a lot of inequality, right? People in Brazil or Africa, Southeast Asia, etc., might not have the funds, you know, to publish in some journals. It's 12,000 euros. I mean, you can buy a house, you can buy a car in some places. I mean, right? So it's not great. There's some significant issues, okay? But at least in theory, that's a good thing. We have redesigned peer review. So for example, I talked about peer community in, you know, it's a new community, expert driven. You recommend preprints or register reports. And yeah, that's the idea of peer community in. It's really great. and they are discipline based. So that's very nice. So I don't know if there is an agricultural one, if there is other disciplines, but I'm aware that I'm aware that there is a psychology one, or they are creating a psychology one, for example, right? So another suggestion is that that has been recently had is that the eLife journal, eLife is a big publisher, especially in life sciences. They are abolishing the idea of accept, reject. So that's you know, we're thinking outside the box more and more often, right? And we also have, for example, how you evaluate research. So, for example, I don't know if you ever heard of DORA. So the San Francisco Declaration for Research Assessment, and you know, you're essentially trying to address how, you know, this metrics that we have, the age index or citations or impact factor of journals, you know, you shouldn't be evaluating quality of research based on that, right? So those are, let's say, structural changes that are welcoming, in line with open science principles, and that allows us to have a more robust science. Okay, now I'm going to change to procedural change now. So if you have any questions, put it on the chat, and I'll answer about this structural part before I start the next one. I see I'm talking too much, but it's super okay if you don't have questions. But I'm drinking water like it's summertime. All right. I don't see any questions on the chat, but if there is, something should pop up and I can stop as well. So when it comes to procedural, so procedure is the way that we do our science, you know, statistics, etc. We have, you know, prediction markets. Prediction markets is the idea that, you know, we collectively can look at an abstract or at a paper and say, hey, how much would this replicate? And based on your expertise and you know, you kind of have those predictions, and that's why it's called, you know, prediction markets, because experts evaluate how replicable it is, right? So that's a very interesting way forward, like just gives us an idea of how much you know, a piece of science is evaluated to be replicable. In any case, the statistical assessments that we have now are much better. So we have better tools at assessing, for example, you know, type 1 errors, type 2 errors, the distribution of p-values. So you have things like the z-curve analysis, the p-curve. They essentially attempt to represent the same phenomena, but it's all about the distribution of test statistics. Test statistics is that thing in statistics that you're using to make an inference. So the t-value, the p-value, the z-value, all of that. But it's the test, and the test statistics name is the general name, but it's essentially that one number that we are testing against a different distribution, against a distribution, to make confidence levels. That's where the alpha level enters into play. And then we have these things. We have also other tools. For example, I don't know if you heard of that, granularity related inconsistence of means. It's called GRIM. There's also the SPRITE. The SPRITE is the sample parameter reconstruction via iterative techniques. Those are all, you know, you're assessing the replicability of, you know, single studies. Those are tools to help you do that. The links are on the slides, by the way, which I obviously will share with you. Then another thing that you can do on the procedural level, or that you were essentially taking, assessing the robustness of your findings is what is called multiverse analysis, which is the idea that, you know, you can apply a linear regression and you use variable X, Y, and Z, but why not T? Why not S, etc.? So essentially in a multiverse analysis, you run every possible model with all the variables that are available to you. So that, and instead of analyzing one coefficient, you analyze a distribution of those coefficients, which is super insane. You need a lot of computational power and programming skills for it, but it is very good. There is also on top of multiverse analysis, which is what I'm describing, there is something called sensitivity analysis, which in turn looks at, it's almost the same thing, but completely different. It analyzes the way you operationalize your variables. So instead of using, you know, a dichotomous variable, you use the continuous version. Instead of adding, you know, a measure, the full measure, you only use the most correlated items, etc. So that's sensitivity analysis. They are all the same. They are conceptually the same, but a little different. Then we have systematic reviews and meta-analysis. Our methodology for both has improved so much. You know, systematic reviews is just like the best kind of reviews you can do. You now have the Prisma methodology, which is the preferred reporting for items of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. You have Nero as well, that is super good. You have Prospero. So you have a lot of different ways to go about systematic reviews. And that's amazing. And you have, you know, a lot of tools that are open, like in R and several R packages for you to conduct your meta-analysis and report it in an open way. Then you have big team science. I already said a few things about that, but it's the idea that, you know, we are taking resources and expertise from people around the world to achieve a result that alone we couldn't do it. So that's why it's big team science, right? So large scale collaborative communities, they do some work in common to achieve a given goal. So FORRT, our community, is a big team science community in that people across the globe collaborate with us on our projects to achieve a goal. Let me just share with you what that looks like, and I'll try to share that. Let me see if I can. Can I also share another page? Let me see. I can. So I'm going to go back to FORRT page just to show you a little bit of what big team science looks like. So in FORRT/contributors, which I can also send it to the chat so you can have a look as well. But normally you see my page. You should see my page. I'm going to zoom in. So those are for each FORRT project, for each person actually that is currently named alphabetically. It shows what each person did. So you see people here from everywhere across the globe and how they have contributed to FORRT. And you can see how large this page is. It's like people after people that did so much for our community. And, you know, without them, we couldn't have the resources that we had. Now, what is important is that this initiative is what we call this credit officers. This initiative is very, very recent, and we only have here about 20% of what FORRT has done. So imagine how many more people we'll have by the end of this. We're still working on populating this page, but once you click here, for example, Thomas, you go to his ORCID ID, and so you can see what he has done, what he works in, and etc. All right, I'll stop. I will reshare my my PowerPoint and go back to it. So that's what big team science is. A lot of people doing a lot of very ambitious things. The other community advance is what is called adversarial collaborations. So imagine folks that really differ on the goals, or not even the goals, but on the findings. Sometimes you have researchers saying, hey, green makes you happy, and somebody else goes and say, actually, I find that green, looking at the green color makes you sad. And these people get together with, you know, a review board. These people get together with other independent parties, and they can collaborate. That's why it's an adversarial collaboration. They defend the way that they do their research, but you find the boundary conditions for replications. So that's what's called adversarial collaborations. The other idea is red teaming. And there is this amazing project funded called Error by Ian Housset and Mate Elson in Switzerland, called Error. And essentially, people get paid to find mistakes on other people's research. So that's super interesting. We call this bounty hunting. And of course, the link to the Error initiative is on the slides. All right, cool. So we're getting at the end of the slides. So let me just talk about a little bit about generalizability, formal theory building, qualitative research, and diversity and inclusion. So generalizability is something completely related to replication, right? What is the extent to which, you know, the work generalizes the effects, say, on psychology research across the world? If I find something here in the Netherlands, can I find the same result in Brazil? But, you know, it's the generalizability is also contextual. The Netherlands does not have the same institutions, political institutions, the same history as Brazil. So to what extent the behavior that you're looking, or the psychology that you're looking, should be the same? So that's a question on this whole generalizability. But at the same time, what happens is people in social sciences collect data, I don't know, 500 people in Brazil. And in São Paulo, which is the biggest capital, right, which is profoundly urban, and says, well, in Brazil, this result replicates. You're like, we have 300 million people, 200 million people. And, you know, that's a lot of people. You can't take just 500 from one place and say it replicates in Brazil. Like, we need to be more careful about these things, right? So that's the idea of generalizability. Then there is the idea of formal theory building, the idea that, you know, we don't have a replicability crisis, but also a theory crisis, because the theories that we have, they are not as specific as possible. They do not have testable axioms that we can say, well, actually, this doesn't work, right? We need a step-by-step you know, way to go about our theories, define our variables. What is the population parameters? What are the, you know, the constants? Formulate a formal mathematical problem. We call a problem statement. So essentially, mathify your theory. Make it testable. Make it falsifiable. Right, that's the idea. Obviously, a lot of what I said now, the majority of what I said now, the tools, the procedure, the structure, mostly concerns quantitative research. But obviously, everything that I'm talking about generalizes to qualitative research. The distinction between qualitative and quantitative research is over, you know, is exaggerated. Both are science, it's just different methodologies, and you can have a lot of open science with qualitative research. There's differences, but we shouldn't be looking at science as quantitative as a norm. It isn't. Qualitative research is just as good as any science, quantitative or otherwise, and you can do transparent research that is qualitative. You can do pre-registrations that is qualitative. Everything that I said is about, also qualitative. And also we should think about, whenever we're trying to improve our science, that the playing field for a lot of people across the globe is not equal, right? We need to have some flexibility into account. There's regional differences, there's marginalized groups, both at the global south, but also in the global north. Remember that the system that we have currently, the political economic system, it is a system that is built upon inequalities, not only of colonial roots, but also inside a given country. Remember that one of the most unequal countries and unfair is the United States, is Brazil as well, right? So you see people with extreme means and people with on the lower end with almost nothing to eat. So that's where diversity and inclusion principles come in for us to find better practices that also we need to see the boundary conditions to which they apply. I'm already getting into the end of this. So this is a little bit of the outlook of this talk a little bit, but it's just for us to think about. We've made some progress. There's room for a lot more progress. We can do our science a lot better. Let's not be super normative, like, hey, you gotta do this. For example, today I read on Twitter, there is a platform of pre-registrations called As Predicted, and it allows you a lot of freedom, right? So it's less strict, but you really need to know your study in order to fill in a good As Predicted pre-registration. But if you don't, then a lot of things will be unspecified. And there was this argument saying, oh, we shouldn't consider As Predicted as a pre-registration. That's garbage or whatever. It wasn't a demeaning way. So we shouldn't do that, right? We're all trying to do our best. We should do it at the incentive level, the top down, as well as the bottom up. We educate each other. We talk to a colleague and say, hey, you use this. If you think something is better, you go talk to the person and you do it better. Right, but not in a normative, forceful way. I think open science is about being open. It's about like FORRT. Hey, here's some teaching resources. You can use it if you want. You're not obligated. There's no better way. There is this way. We think that this way is a good way, like that kind of thing. All right. So that's the outlook. There's some pieces here. And this is our links, yeah, check us out, email us, find us on X or Blue Sky. We're on Blue Sky, we're on LinkedIn, we're on all of the socials. I should add those there. And if you need a little bit of an additional reading, here's a very nice study by Charlotte Pennington, a book. It's a really nice book about replications, or a student's guide to open science. That's it, folks. I'll stop sharing the slides, or I'll just open for questions while the slides are open, whatever you prefer.
I think I could just say, wow, Flavio, like this session has been so inspiring, and I think what we got out is the fact that we could do a lot. You know, the community has a lot to offer, you know, in the field of open science. And this is what at AREN we're trying to do, you know, because the experience of open science in Africa is different.
Yeah.
So and clearly some things would work and some things won't, you know. So it's very important that we don't, as you said, think about like these materials or things on open science as a must or as the best way, you know, but it is a way that we could try to use, and it could work and it could not work, you know.
Yeah.
We should be open to that. And I think one of the things that you've mentioned, for example, pre-registration, we've been talking about that in many sessions. And for example, it might be that pre-registration wouldn't work, you know, for Africa. Why? Because there's a big chance that I pre-register a study, but then because I'm in a low-resourced institution or lab, I wouldn't be able to do the work quickly, you know?
Yeah.
So then, like, my study would be scooped. So I love what you said, you know, there is no perfect way. There are different ways that we could try to use and see what works best for us. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. I
Yeah.
shared on the chat the slides just now. And I would be happy to share in any other way that you like. But you can find the slides in this page as well that I'm sharing on the chat. There in this page that I just shared, you can find the slides, the syllabus, if you ever want to teach this. You can also find a summary of the paper that we wrote about this topic. And you can also find a paper that is open for you. So it's an entire page of resources for you. And then you can find the slides and everything there. Yeah. And as well as the file is actually shared there. But I'm also happy to share with you, Lemis, in the Slack of the AREN, and whatever helps.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Yeah. And we have a Google Drive that we put all of these things for our trainee. So we'll be putting the sessions,
Yeah.
The slides and the recording as well for those who couldn't attend live. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds really, really great. And as you
Yeah.
know, I don't know if folks know, but FORRT is partnered with AREN, and I hope that we do things together in the future. And
Yeah. So many things that we could do together, and we're really happy to sort of be I wouldn't say leading the discussion in Africa, but what we're trying to do is, you know, be in touch with those at the grassroots, those who are doing the work, you know, to see like how things would work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there is a comment by Michael. Yeah, he said inclusions got me thinking about replications for studies among pregnant women. Yeah. And maybe children in an African context. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, is the main message, right?
Exactly.
And
regardless of the discipline.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with this overview, I think that, you know, not only people are more you know, aware of what is out there, but they can also, you know, understand more, study more. And this is like we had hoped that this review allowed folks to move forward. And yeah.
It's an eye-opener, you know, because there are things that I didn't know that existed, you know, but now after this presentation, oh, like there is an organized resource, you know, that you could use to go about 13 things. And I think we will definitely have you for an additional like work or sessions, because I think there's a lot that the community could help with in sort of enhancing African overview of the resources that you guys have at FORRT. So I think we have a lot to do together. Yeah.
I appreciate that immensely.
Thank you. If you guys have comments or questions, we still have 10 minutes to go. So please feel free to unmute and talk. There's a lot of thank yous and amazing sessions in the chat, and I couldn't agree more.
I think I could speak from the global RN community's perspectives too, in terms of promoting reproducibility and how some of these findings work. And I think when Musa asked the question, Flavio was spot on. I think currently the efforts have been around trying to identify how we can promote and support the researchers more than them doing, let's say, replication studies. So it's more of fundings are more of community efforts, like centered and oriented. I think last year the RN community was working on the Horizon Ridera bid as a collaborative bid, and I'm going to share the link very soon. When you look at the requirements, it was more about interventions and policies around practices and how we can promote reproducibility more than, let's say, doing studies around reproducibility, or let's say testing research papers that have been published. So like Flavio said, it's still a learning process, right? You can't just make it normative that do this. I mean, we all are trying to understand how this is going to work in different community contexts. So I think currently, this is what the community is directed towards. We want to understand how it could work here. How are we going to make it work here? How are we going to interact with the communities then and ensure that there are no disparities between how it is operated in, let's say, in the UK and maybe in Africa? So I think that is generally how the approach has been. So if you are thinking around, let's say, working on a project related to replication, reproducibility, and stuff like that, I think going in that direction would really help, because the funders are looking at how they can come up with ways to go about it. How are we going to work on this? Rather than let's go and do an application study on, let's say, a number of research papers. So I think Flavio was spot on that he said that it's more of community efforts, how we're going to understand these things, how we're going to support this, now going to promote these things. And I think that is something that we can do as a community, like Lame said. That is why RN is there. So if it's something we can work on from the African context, let's say we want to understand these things and then how we can come up with interventions to support researchers here so that their research work is more reproducible or replicable, then it's something we can do, right? But it's something we have to do in collaboration with the community here and see the best way to go about it. So it's more of how can we make the research being done reproducible or replicable more than, let's say, how are we going to test the papers that have been published and see if they are applicable? So that's like the direction that the community is moving towards, to kind of support what is going to be done, so that the work that is going to come out to be more standard and adhere to some of these principles. So I think Flavio and Lames were spot on when they said that, yeah.
Yeah, very well pointed out, Manuel. I agree. Yeah.
So does any one of you have a comment or a question for Flavio? Please feel free to unmute. Okay, then if not, I guess we could say thank you very much, Flavio. This has been such an inspiring session, and I think we will definitely see you a lot in the future with the LNL training program and with all the other projects that we're planning to do at AREN. We cannot thank you enough, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Lamis. It's a real pleasure to be here. You know, it is this kind of initiative that, you know, brings a lot of heart to the work that we do, and we are just very appreciative of yours and Emmanuel's initiative to get us all together. And it's a really great idea to have this in the way you set up. It's a smart way, and I really hope that folks know how lucky they are to have you, and that you're also thanked. And I know I appreciate the work that you guys do, and feel free to reach out and we can see how we go ahead together. All right.
Thank you, Flavio. And I also wanted to extend the thanks to the trainees themselves, because this has been such an intensive training program, and they're all busy, and they're all working, but they always find the time to come and contribute, and it's been an amazing journey, to be honest. So thank you to all of you guys for attending.
All right,
Thank you.
folks.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye,
you. Thank you
everybody.
very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Au revoir.
Au
Au
revoir.
revoir.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien, Joseph.
Merci beaucoup.
De rien.